Open the safe and the gold is yours, joked the tycoon. But the poor rancher shocked him. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's begin. The wind howled through the narrow streets of the small western town, carrying with it the promise of a new day. In the heart of this rugged place, a lone figure stood, framed against the early morning sun. The poor rancher, Jonathan Jack McKinney, was a man of few words and fewer possessions. His ranch, nestled on the outskirts of town, was a humble piece of land that had been passed down through generations, each more weathered than the last. With his weathered face and rough hands, Jack was a symbol of perseverance, living a life marked by hard work and endless struggle. He had always managed to scrape by, never having much to show for his labor, but that didn't matter to him. His land, his animals, and his simple life were enough. But for the tycoon, Henry Caldwell, that was a different story. Henry was the embodiment of wealth and power, his lavish mansion a sharp contrast to the dirt and dust of the town's outskirts. He had come to town a year ago, bringing with him promises of prosperity and opportunities that seemed too good to pass up. Jack had always remained wary of the tycoon, knowing all too well that people like Henry never did anything without expecting something in return. The two men had crossed paths a few times, but Jack kept his distance. However, today, as fate would have it, their worlds were about to collide in a way neither of them expected. Henry had invited Jack to his mansion, a grand affair with towering walls and manicured lawns, a far cry from the dirt-streaked barn and fields that Jack called home. Jack wasn't sure why he was summoned, but his curiosity got the best of him, and he agreed to make the long trek into town. When he arrived, Henry greeted him with a sly grin and a glass of whiskey, his voice smooth and charming. Jack, my friend, it's good to see you. I've got something special for you today. You've worked hard your whole life, and it's about time you got your reward. Jack raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Henry led him to a large room, the air thick with the scent of polished wood and expensive leather. At the center of the room stood an enormous safe, its steel door gleaming under the dim light. Open the safe and the gold is yours, Henry said, his voice filled with amusement. All you have to do is open it, and the wealth you've always dreamed of is yours for the taking. Jack stood still, his eyes narrowing as he studied the safe. He had been through enough in his life to know that things weren't always as they seemed. There was something about this offer that didn't sit right with him. But Jack was no fool. He wasn't about to turn down a chance at something that could change his life. He took a deep breath and walked toward the safe. His hand rested on the cold metal handle, and for a moment, he hesitated. Could it really be this simple? Was it really possible that the tycoon was offering him such a fortune without a catch? Jack turned the handle, slowly. The sound of the safe's door creaking open seemed to echo through the room. What would be inside? Gold? Silver? Or something more? As the door swung open, Jack's eyes widened in disbelief. As the massive door of the safe creaked open, Jack stood frozen, his eyes scanning the contents in disbelief. What he had expected, and what was actually before him, were worlds apart. Instead of piles of gold and silver, there were stacks of old documents, yellowed with age. Jack's heart sank as he reached forward, slowly pulling the first piece of paper from the pile. It was a contract, its handwriting faded but still legible. He glanced over at Henry, whose smirk had vanished, replaced by a look of quiet expectation. What is this? Jack asked, his voice thick with confusion. Henry's grin returned, though it was colder now, more calculating. You didn't think it would be that easy, did you? Henry replied. The gold was never for you, Jack. It was a test. Jack's brow furrowed as he read through more of the documents. They were all related to land deeds, ownerships, and titles, most of which Jack recognized from his own land. These papers, hidden away for so long, were evidence that Henry had been quietly acquiring properties across the region, using deceit and manipulation to gain control of vast tracts of land. Jack's stomach churned as he pieced together the puzzle. This wasn't about generosity or wealth, it was about control. Henry had been systematically buying out the ranchers, quietly forcing them into bankruptcy, and now it was Jack's turn. Jack stood tall, his hands shaking slightly as he held the papers in his hands. "You've been stealing my land," he muttered, his voice hoarse. Henry's lips curled into a smile, though it lacked warmth. "Not just yours, Jack. Yours and everyone else's." The weight of the truth hit Jack like a physical blow. He had been living on borrowed time, unaware that the very land he cherished was being taken from under him. Henry had set this trap years ago, a slow and calculated scheme to take control of the entire region. But why the game? Jack demanded, his voice rising with anger. Henry's eyes gleamed with amusement. "You're the last one, Jack. The last one standing in my way. You see, I'm not just a businessman. I'm a collector. And now, I collect the last piece." Jack clenched his fists, feeling the raw fury build within him. His family had worked this land for generations, enduring hardship and sweat. And now, this man wanted to take it all. But Jack wasn't about to go down without a fight. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to calm. "You'll never get away with this," he said, his voice steady but filled with defiance. "I've got a different plan for you." Henry chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "And what's that? What can a poor rancher like you do against me?" Jack didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned his back to Henry, his mind racing. He could feel the weight of his decision pressing down on him. The gold had been a lie, but now he had something much more powerful, knowledge. Jack knew the region better than anyone, knew the land, the people, and the weaknesses in Henry's plan. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that this wasn't just a fight for land, it was a fight for justice. And if Henry thought he could take it all without consequence, he had another thing coming. Jack's thoughts raced as he made his decision. He would not fight Henry with violence or force, as Henry had expected. Instead, he would use the law, the very system that Henry thought he controlled. Jack had spent years quietly building connections, helping his neighbors, and earning their trust. It was time to turn those connections against Henry. Jack walked toward the door, leaving the documents behind. He knew what he had to do. He wouldn't let Henry win. He would expose the Tycoon for what he truly was, and he would take back what was rightfully his. Jack McKinney stood on the steps of his humble ranch house, the morning sun casting long shadows across the land. His heart raced with determination as he thought back to the moment he had walked out of Henry Caldwell's mansion, the weight of those old contracts still fresh in his hands. He knew what he had to do next. It wasn't just about land or money anymore. It was about something far bigger, taking down a man who thought he could control everything with his wealth and manipulation. The land had always been Jack's, passed down through generations, a piece of his family's history. He wasn't about to let Henry take that away from him, but he also knew he couldn't do it alone. As he looked out across the rolling hills and the vast acres of land he had worked so hard to maintain, Jack knew he had to act fast. Henry's empire of deceit was growing, and Jack was the last man standing in his way. The first step was to gather the evidence. Jack rode into town that afternoon, the wind whipping through his hair as his horse galloped down the dusty trail. He headed straight for the local sheriff's office. Sheriff Daniels had always been a decent man, though not one to get involved in the political games of the wealthy. But Jack knew the sheriff had a soft spot for him. He had helped him out of a few sticky situations over the years, and now, it was time to call on that favor. Sheriff Daniels was sitting behind his desk when Jack walked in. The sheriff looked up, his face softening when he saw Jack. "What brings you here, McKinney?" he asked, setting down his pen. Jack stepped forward, his hand holding the stack of documents. "I need your help, Sheriff," Jack said, his voice low but steady. "It's about Henry Caldwell. He's been stealing land from everyone in this region, and I've got the proof." Sheriff Daniels leaned back in his chair, his brow furrowed. "Caldwell, huh? That's a mighty big claim, Jack. What kind of proof are we talking about?" Jack handed the sheriff the papers. "This," Jack said, "is just the beginning. Caldwell's been buying up properties in secret, using illegal contracts and manipulating the law. He's been doing it for years, and now, he's after my land." Sheriff Daniels took the documents and began flipping through them. As he read, his face grew graver. "This is serious, Jack. This is more than just a land dispute. Caldwell's a powerful man. You're sure about this?" Jack nodded, his jaw clenched. "I'm sure. I've lived here my whole life. I know this land better than anyone. He's trying to take everything from me, and from everyone else in this town. It's time to put a stop to it." The sheriff let out a long sigh, glancing at the papers once more. You know what you're asking, right? Going after a man like Caldwell, it's no small thing. He's got influence, connections, money. This could get ugly. Jack stared at the sheriff, his resolve hardening. I've seen enough, Sheriff. I'm not backing down. This land is mine, and I'll fight for it. I just need you to help me expose him. Sheriff Daniels looked up from the papers, his expression softening. All right, McKinney. I'll help you. But we're going to need more than just these papers. We'll need witnesses, and we'll need to be smart about this. If we're going to take him down, we have to do it by the book. Caldwell's not going to go down easy. Jack nodded. He had expected this, but he also knew it was their only shot. He wasn't going to let Henry Caldwell walk away from this. He was going to make sure of it. With the sheriff's help, Jack began to put a plan in motion. He started reaching out to other ranchers, the ones Caldwell had targeted over the years. Some were hesitant, afraid of what might happen if they spoke out, but Jack reassured them. One by one, they came forward, offering their testimonies and lending their support. It was slow going, but it was enough. The pieces were falling into place. As the sun set that evening, Jack sat on the porch of his ranch house, a sense of purpose settling over him. Tomorrow, the real fight would begin. The days following Jack's visit to the sheriff were filled with tension. The sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty plains, and Jack spent his time riding from ranch to ranch, gathering the final pieces of his plan. Each conversation was a delicate dance, as many of the other ranchers were still hesitant to speak out against Henry Caldwell. Some feared for their livelihoods, while others didn't want to risk angering the powerful Tycoon. But Jack's determination was unwavering. He knew the time had come to make his move. The whispers among the ranchers were growing louder, and more of them began to rally behind him, realizing that if they didn't act now, they would lose everything to Caldwell's greed. On the fourth day, the plan was finally in place. Jack and Sheriff Daniels met in secret, far away from the prying eyes of Caldwell's men. Together, they had assembled a small group of trusted individuals, ranchers, local business owners, and even a few former employees of Caldwell who had witnessed his shady dealings. They had gathered enough evidence to expose him, but they needed to move quickly. Jack sat across from Sheriff Daniels in the small, dimly lit room, a map of the region spread out in front of them. His hand hovered over the area marked with a large X, the land Jack had inherited from his father, the land Caldwell had been trying to steal. We've got one shot at this, Sheriff Daniels said, his voice low and steady. If we don't get Caldwell with this, he'll slip away, and it'll be impossible to catch him. He's too well connected. Jack nodded, his jaw set. We can't let him win. This land is mine. It's my family's legacy, and I won't let him take it. The sheriff studied the map, then looked up at Jack. We'll need to hit him hard, and fast. The longer we wait, the more chance he has to destroy the evidence or cover his tracks. We go to court tomorrow. Jack's heart pounded in his chest. Tomorrow. It was the moment of truth. As the sheriff left to make the final preparations, Jack gathered his thoughts. The past few days had been a whirlwind. He had done everything he could to prepare, but the weight of what was about to happen hung heavily over him. He had never imagined his fight for justice would come to this, taking on a man like Henry Caldwell in a court of law. But this wasn't just about money or land anymore. This was about right and wrong. Jack knew that if they could expose Caldwell's lies, the people would rally behind him. The next morning, Jack rode into town with Sheriff Daniels, his stomach in knots. The courthouse loomed ahead, its stone steps leading to the front door where the final battle would take place. Jack's heart raced as he stepped off his horse and entered the building. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Jack could feel the weight of the crowd's eyes on him as he walked past the rows of benches, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. Henry Caldwell sat at the front, his sharp eyes fixed on Jack as he entered. The Tycoon looked as smug as ever, confident in his wealth and power. Jack couldn't help but feel a surge of anger. This was the man who had tried to destroy everything his family had worked for. But Jack wasn't going to let him get away with it. As the trial began, Jack took his seat at the front of the room, the evidence laid out in front of him. The sheriff and the other witnesses were ready to testify, and Jack knew that this was their chance to take down Caldwell for good. The courtroom was packed with spectators, many of whom had come to watch the showdown between the two men. The judge, a stern man with a reputation for fairness, called the trial to order. Jack's mind raced as he listened to the opening statements. The tension in the room was palpable. Henry Caldwell stood up, his voice smooth and calculated as he began to speak. Ladies and gentlemen of the court, I am a businessman. I've built an empire from the ground up, and I've always operated within the law. Mr. McKinney here is simply upset because he has failed to keep up with the times. He is a man of the past, clinging to outdated traditions. Jack's blood boiled as Caldwell continued, weaving a web of lies. But Jack knew he couldn't let the tycoon's words sway the court. He stood up, his voice calm but filled with determination. Your Honor, Jack began, I'm not here to fight for wealth or status. I'm here to fight for what's right. My family's land, our legacy, is being stolen by a man who believes he can buy anything with his money. But money doesn't make a man right. What's right is standing up for justice. The room fell silent as Jack's words echoed through the courtroom. For the first time, Jack could feel the weight of his words sinking in. This was his fight, not just for himself, but for everyone who had been wronged by Henry Caldwell's greed. As the trial dragged on, the air in the courtroom grew thick with tension. Jack's words had set the tone, and now it was time to see if they would be enough to bring justice. Henry Caldwell, who had once seemed so untouchable, was now visibly uneasy, his confident facade slipping little by little. Jack could feel the shift in the room. The spectators, many of them once loyal to Caldwell, were beginning to doubt him. For the first time, Jack could sense the tides turning in his favor. The judge, a stern but fair man, called the next witness to the stand. Sheriff Daniels stood tall, his voice unwavering as he began to recount the evidence they had gathered. He spoke about the shady land deals, the forged signatures, and the countless families Caldwell had driven to ruin. Jack felt his heart swell with pride. Sheriff Daniels had been with him from the beginning, and his testimony was the final piece that could tip the scales. As the sheriff finished his statement, Jack could see Henry's eyes darting nervously. The once invincible tycoon was no longer the man who controlled everything. Jack had stripped away his layers of deceit, and now, there was nothing left but the truth. Jack's mind raced as he prepared for the next phase of his plan. He knew the fight wasn't over yet, but with the evidence they had, Caldwell's empire of lies was starting to crumble. The courtroom grew quiet as the defense called its next witness. To everyone's surprise, it wasn't one of Caldwell's employees or business partners, but a local rancher who had once worked for Jack. The rancher, a man named Samuel, had been forced to sell his land years ago when Caldwell pressured him with promises of a better future. Jack's eyes locked with Samuel's as he took the stand. Samuel had been one of the many victims of Caldwell's manipulation, and now, he was about to expose the tycoon's true nature. I was desperate, Samuel began, his voice cracking with emotion. I thought Caldwell was the answer to all my problems. But he didn't care about me, or my land. He just wanted to take it from me. And when I couldn't pay, he threatened to ruin me. Jack's heart ached as he listened to Samuel's words. It wasn't just his own fight anymore. It was a fight for every rancher who had ever been pushed to the brink by a man like Caldwell. As Samuel spoke, Jack knew that this was the moment he had been waiting for. The truth was out, and there was no going back. Samuel's testimony was a turning point. The defense tried to discredit him, but it was too late. The jury was already convinced. Jack watched as the faces in the room shifted, as people who had once been on Caldwell's side now looked at him with suspicion. Caldwell's arrogance had led him to underestimate the power of the truth. As the trial came to a close, the judge called for a short recess. Jack stepped outside the courtroom, his mind racing. He knew that the next few hours would be crucial. This wasn't just about winning a case. It was about changing the future of the land he loved. Jack's hands shook as he gripped the railing outside the courthouse, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He had fought for so long, and now, it was time to see if it would be enough. As he stood there, he heard a voice behind him. It was Sheriff Daniels. You've done good, Jack. But the fight's not over yet. Jack turned to face him, his eyes filled with determination. I know, he said quietly, but we're closer than we've ever been. The sheriff clapped him on the back, a rare smile breaking through his usually stern expression. You've got guts, Jack. I'll give you that. As the recess ended, Jack returned to the courtroom, ready for the final showdown. The jury returned to their seats, and the judge called for closing statements. Jack's heart pounded as he prepared to speak. This was it. This was the moment he had been fighting for. As he stood before the judge and the jury, Jack took a deep breath. He could feel the weight of his family's legacy on his shoulders, but he also knew that this wasn't just about land. It was about standing up to the forces that tried to crush those who didn't have the power to fight back. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Jack began, his voice steady. This is more than a case about property. This is about justice. This is about right and wrong. Henry Caldwell may have the money, but he doesn't have the truth on his side. And that's what matters. The truth will always come out, no matter how hard you try to hide it. Jack paused for a moment, letting his words sink in. My family worked this land for generations. It's been passed down through the years, and it's the land I plan to pass on to my children. No one, not even a man as powerful as Henry Caldwell, has the right to take that away from me. The room was silent as Jack finished speaking. He could feel the weight of the jury's gaze on him, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. The judge nodded, signaling that it was time for deliberation. Jack's future, and the future of the land he loved, was in their hands. The jury deliberated for what felt like an eternity. The sun had long since set, and the courtroom lights cast a harsh glow over the proceedings. Jack sat anxiously, his hands clenched tightly in his lap. Sheriff Daniels stood by his side, offering a silent nod of reassurance, but Jack could see the unease in his eyes. He knew the stakes were higher than ever. Caldwell, who had remained eerily calm throughout the trial, was now pacing back and forth, his face unreadable. Jack couldn't help but notice how the once untouchable Tycoon was now a shadow of his former self. His confidence had crumbled, replaced by a growing tension that could not be hidden. Jack had seen the cracks begin to form when Caldwell had failed to deflect the mounting evidence. But now, it was in the hands of the jury, and the waiting was unbearable. As the minutes ticked by, Jack's thoughts drifted back to everything that had led him to this point. His father, his grandfather, and all the generations before him who had worked the land. They had fought tooth and nail for every inch, and Jack was determined not to let it slip away now. The silence in the courtroom was broken by the sudden clatter of footsteps. The door to the jury room creaked open, and all eyes turned toward the group of jurors who had just returned. The foreman, a middle-aged man with a stern face, stepped forward and cleared his throat. Jack's heart raced, and he could feel his breath catch in his throat. This was it, the moment of truth. The foreman's eyes scanned the room before he spoke. We, the jury, have reached a verdict. Jack could barely hear the words. His pulse was pounding in his ears as he leaned forward, hoping for the outcome he had worked so hard to achieve. The judge nodded, gesturing for the foreman to continue. We find the defendant, Henry Caldwell, guilty of fraud, manipulation, and unlawful acquisition of property. Jack's heart leaped in his chest. A wave of relief washed over him, but it was quickly replaced by the rush of adrenaline that surged through his veins. Henry Caldwell, the man who had tried to destroy everything Jack held dear, was finally being held accountable. The room was still, the tension almost palpable. Caldwell stood frozen, his face pale, his arrogance gone. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Jack watched him, his jaw clenched, as the reality of the moment sank in. The Tycoon, once so powerful and untouchable, was now facing the consequences of his actions. The judge banged his gavel, calling for order. The court will now proceed with sentencing. Jack's gaze never left Caldwell. He could feel a sense of justice finally taking hold, a sense of victory that had been hard-earned. This wasn't just about winning a case. It was about sending a message. The fight for the land, for truth, for what was right, had been long and difficult, but now, Jack had his answer. He had not only protected his family's legacy, but he had also taken down a man who thought he could control everything with his wealth. The court adjourned shortly after the verdict, and as Jack walked out of the courthouse, he felt a weight lift off his shoulders. The battle was over, but the journey wasn't. He still had his land, still had the future ahead of him. But now, he had the satisfaction of knowing that the truth had triumphed. His life would continue, but it would be different. The land he had fought for would remain his, and he would continue to work it, just as his ancestors had. And as he stepped out into the cool evening air, he could hear the sound of hooves in the distance, the familiar rhythm that reminded him of everything he had fought for. It was a new beginning, the end of one chapter and the start of another. A chapter where justice had prevailed, and where one man's strength, determination, and commitment to truth had made all the difference. The following weeks were a blur for Jack McKinney. The dust had finally settled after the trial, but the weight of everything that had happened lingered in the air like the dry winds that swept across the plains. The land was still his, and Henry Caldwell was behind bars, but Jack knew that victory came with a price. The community had been shaken to its core. Many of the ranchers who had once been hesitant to speak out against Caldwell now saw Jack as a hero, but Jack was reluctant to accept their praise. He had simply done what was right. The true victory, he believed, was in the fight itself, in the truth that had come to light. But the changes didn't stop there. The ranchers who had once feared Caldwell began to unite, their trust in each other growing stronger. It wasn't just Jack's land that had been threatened. It was the way of life for everyone who depended on the land to survive. As the weeks passed, Jack noticed the shift. Neighbors who had kept to themselves began helping each other more. The rivalry that once defined the area faded as a new sense of community took root. People who had been too scared to speak up now found their voices. For Jack, the sense of solidarity was a bittersweet reminder of what had been lost, how the land had almost slipped from his hands. But the future was beginning to take shape, one where cooperation and justice prevailed. It wasn't just about reclaiming what had been taken from him. It was about ensuring that no one else would face the same struggles he had. One evening, as Jack sat on his porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, he saw a familiar figure approach from the distance. It was Sheriff Daniels, his silhouette outlined by the setting sun. Jack had come to respect the sheriff not only as a lawman, but as a man of integrity. Sheriff Daniels had stood by his side from the very beginning, and Jack knew that the fight for the land had not just been his own. As the sheriff dismounted his horse, he gave Jack a solemn nod. "How's it feel?" he asked, taking a seat beside him. Jack leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on the distant hills. "It feels like the land's mine again," he said quietly, "but it's different now." Sheriff Daniels nodded. "Yeah, I reckon it is. You've got a good community here now. They're behind you." Jack chuckled softly. "They were always behind the land. It's just a shame it took something like this for us to see it." The sheriff didn't respond, but his silence spoke volumes. They both knew the cost of the battle, but they also knew that the outcome had been worth it. "You're a good man, Jack," Sheriff Daniels said after a long pause. "You fought for what was right, and you've made a difference. A lot of people are going to remember that." Jack looked at the sheriff, his expression thoughtful. "I didn't do it for the recognition. I did it because it was the right thing to do." The sheriff smiled. "That's why you'll always have this land. It's not just yours, it's everyone's. And you'll protect it, no matter what." Jack's gaze shifted back to the land, the place that had been a part of his family for generations. He could almost feel the spirits of his ancestors watching over him. The wind rustled the tall grass, and for the first time in a long time, Jack felt at peace. He had fought for this land, and he had won. But more importantly, he had fought for something much greater, a future where justice was not for sale, and where the strength of a man's word was stronger than any amount of money. In the distance, he saw the lights of the town flicker on, the first signs of night settling over the valley. It was a new chapter, one where the struggles of the past would never be forgotten, but would always be a reminder of the price of freedom. Jack stood up, stretched, and looked back at Sheriff Daniels. "Let's get back to work, old friend," he said. The sheriff chuckled and stood up as well. "That's the spirit, Jack. The work's never done." And as they walked together back toward the heart of the town, Jack knew that his fight for justice had not only changed his life, but had laid the foundation for a better future, for his family, for his community, and for the land that would carry his name for generations to come. Months passed after the trial, and Jack McKinney found himself standing on the same porch where he had spent countless hours, once worried about the future of his family's land. Now, with Henry Caldwell gone from his life and the community growing stronger, Jack felt a peace that had eluded him for years. But it wasn't just about the land anymore. It was about what came next. Jack knew the real work had only just begun. The victory in the courthouse had been a turning point, but it was the rebuilding of trust among the ranchers, the farmers, and everyone who had been affected by Caldwell's greed that would determine the future. The winds of change were blowing through the valley, and Jack was ready to face whatever came next. The sheriff had been right about one thing. There would always be work to do. But now, the work was about healing. As Jack rode through the valley, Past the homes of the ranchers he had once known only as rivals, he noticed a shift. Neighbors who had kept their distance now nodded in recognition. Conversations in the fields were more genuine, more about cooperation than competition. It was as though the land had bonded them in a way Caldwell's influence never could. Jack smiled, knowing that the battle was not just for the land, but for the spirit of the community. A few days later, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, Jack rode out to the farthest edge of his land, the place where he had always felt closest to his ancestors. The rolling hills stretched out before him, the same land his father had once worked. Jack could almost hear the whispers of those who had come before him, the legacy of hard work, perseverance, and the unwavering belief in justice. But as he stood there, gazing at the horizon, he knew that he had something they hadn't, an opportunity to forge a new path for future generations. It was time to take the land back, not just for himself, but for his children and for all those who had stood by him. He wasn't alone anymore. The community was with him, and together, they would restore what had been taken. As Jack sat atop his horse, a quiet determination settled within him. The past had been difficult, filled with deceit and struggles, but it had shaped him into the man he was today. And today, he was ready to face whatever came next. The wind picked up again, carrying the scent of the earth and the promise of a new dawn. Jack rode back toward the town, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. There was still work to be done, but the road ahead no longer seemed as daunting as it once had. With the support of his neighbors, the truth on his side, and the land beneath his feet, Jack knew that the future was his to shape. As he approached his ranch house, he could see the warm glow of lights from within. The house, though simple, had always been a symbol of home, a place where he and his family could find refuge. And now, it was a place where new dreams would be born. Jack dismounted his horse and entered the house, where his wife, Sarah, was preparing dinner. She looked up and smiled, and Jack could see the pride in her eyes. "How was the ride?" she asked, her voice soft and comforting. Jack smiled back, walking over to her and placing a hand on her shoulder. "It was good," he said, his voice steady with the certainty that had settled in his heart. "The land's ours, Sarah. It's always been ours. And now, we have the chance to make it something more." Sarah looked at him, her eyes filled with the same quiet strength. He had always admired. "I know, Jack. I know. And I believe in us. I believe in you." They stood there for a moment, the weight of the past few months finally beginning to lift. Jack knew that this was just the beginning, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like the fight was over. There was nothing left to prove. The land, the community, and the future, it was all within their reach. Jack took a deep breath, savoring the peace that had eluded him for so long. He had fought for what was right, and now, he could finally enjoy the fruits of that labor. With his family by his side, and the land beneath his feet, Jack McKinney knew that he had everything he needed to build a future that would last for generations to come. As the years went by, the land that Jack McKinney had fought so hard to protect flourished under his care. The community around him grew stronger, bound by the struggles they had faced and the triumphs they had shared. Jack's reputation as a man of integrity and justice spread far beyond the valley. He had not only won the battle for his family's land, but he had also restored a sense of pride and unity to the people who had been scattered by fear and deception. The valley, once divided by rivalry and distrust, was now a place where cooperation and mutual respect thrived. The ranchers worked together, sharing resources and knowledge, helping one another through good times and bad. The work was hard, but the rewards were even greater. As Jack stood on the porch of his home one evening, watching the sun dip below the hills, he realized how much things had changed. The same land that had once been the source of so much conflict now stood as a testament to the power of standing up for what was right. Jack had learned that true strength came not from wealth or power, but from the unwavering belief in justice and the willingness to fight for it. He had fought not just for his land, but for the community, for the future of the next generation. The wind blew gently across the fields, carrying with it the sound of his children's laughter as they played in the yard. Jack smiled, his heart swelling with pride. His son, James, had grown into a strong young man, eager to learn the ways of the land. His daughter, Emily, had a kind heart, always helping those in need. just as Jack had done when he was younger. They were the future, and Jack knew that they would carry on the legacy of hard work, integrity, and justice. Sarah, too, had been a rock by his side. She had been there through it all, through the long days of struggle, through the quiet moments of doubt, and through the joyous celebrations of victory. Together, they had built a life that was worth living, one rooted in love and respect for the land and each other. As Jack looked out over the valley, he knew that the future was bright. The battle against Henry Caldwell had been the defining moment of his life, but it had also been the beginning of something much bigger. Jack had set an example for the generations to come. He had shown them that no matter how difficult the journey, justice would always prevail if they stood together. The valley was no longer just a place. It was a home, a place where the lessons of the past were carried forward into the future. The community Jack had helped rebuild was stronger than ever. As the years passed, new faces arrived in the valley, farmers, ranchers, and families eager to start a new life, drawn to the spirit of unity and justice that Jack had fostered. The legend of the poor rancher who stood up to the rich tycoon spread across the land, inspiring others to fight for what was right, no matter the cost. And though Jack had once feared that he would lose everything, he now knew that the real wealth was not in gold or land, but in the bonds he had forged with the people who had become his family. As Jack sat back in his chair, surrounded by his loved ones, he knew that his journey had come full circle. He had fought for justice, for his family, and for the land, and now he could rest knowing that the legacy he had built would live on. The valley was his, but more importantly, it was the people's. Together, they had secured a future that no man could ever take away. The sun sank lower, casting a golden glow over the fields, and Jack leaned back, content in the knowledge that the fight for what was right had been worth every sacrifice. He closed his eyes, a quiet smile on his face, as he listened to the sounds of his family, knowing that the world would be a better place for generations to come. Discover an unforgettable tale of courage, justice, and perseverance in this captivating Western story. Follow Jack McKinney, a humble rancher, as he fights to reclaim his family's land from the greedy tycoon, Henry Caldwell. Through hardship and triumph, this story shows the power of standing up for what is right, even when the odds seem impossible. As Jack's battle for justice unfolds, he unites a divided community, bringing them together against the corrupt forces that threaten their way of life. This Western story takes you on a journey through the harsh but beautiful landscapes of the American West, where the land is more than just property. It is a legacy. From courtroom drama to heartfelt moments of unity, this story weaves together themes of family, justice, and the spirit of the frontier. Jack's victory is not just about reclaiming land. It's about building a future where truth and integrity shine. As the story draws to a close, Jack looks towards the horizon, knowing that the fight for justice will never end, but the strength of the community he helped rebuild will stand the test of time. Experience this powerful tale that encapsulates the essence of Western stories, where the struggle for what is right is as timeless as the land itself. With breathtaking moments of suspense, heartwarming acts of bravery, and the unbreakable bond of family, this is a Western story you won't want to miss.